Hello, my name is Rob Black. I'm an advisor with SAC Consulting based in Oban and Argyll as part of Scotland's Rural College. I'll be talking to you about what I have dubbed the power of poly units, and we'll be taking you through why these items have become increasingly popular in recent years, as well as what you need to know about the advantages that they hold for smallholders and crofters alike. The agenda for the next half hour or so will cover background story of why these items have become such a popular and diverse tool for smallholders. We'll talk about the various types of unit that are available and which will lead to some coverage of the practical and varied uses that these items have and the advantages and disadvantages of the different types. And we'll finish off with some ideas and thoughts on what to do with these items that come from poly production. Poly units, it's fair to say, are not a new technology. People have been successfully growing in greenhouses and probably more recently polytunnels for quite some time to various degrees of scale depending on enterprise. However, in the last 3 to 4 years particularly, there's been a surge in demand and popularity for these types of units in places that there wasn't before. There's a few reasons for this. In the northwest of Scotland and the Western Isles probably in particular, polytunnels have not really been that viable an option. The north boasts some of the highest wind speeds in the country, and more often than not, a crofter or a small farmer would wake up to find the polytunnel had gone on a one-way trip across the Atlantic, never to be seen again. But what's changed now is that many polytunnel companies and other companies have actually redesigned poly units completely in order to become more robust, which is something that we'll look at in greater detail further on. But these changes have meant that where polytunnel growing was not viable before has now become something that's more feasible to those, particularly in the remoter areas. Most recently perhaps as well is the changes in attitude that have come from the likes of Brexit, uncertainty, or indeed the impacts of COVID-19 as well, has had on the viability of people to produce and the limitations to the availability of items that were often taken for granted that we can pick up in a supermarket. More and more people have turned to local businesses, local producers, and they're taking more of a considered approach to where their food comes from, how it's grown. The theme of eat seasonal and buy local has gained real traction throughout lockdown and has even encouraged more people to go that step further and to start growing on their own. Speaking in particular with local businesses in the area and beyond, there seems to be an increased opportunity for those with a bit of land and a bit of a green thumb really to tap into the change in social mindset. Businesses that deliver produce or use produce in their business, like a restaurant or cafe, have stated that there isn't enough local produce available to meet the demand, which presents a whole new range of possibilities and opportunities, particularly for small farmers and crofters that maybe haven't got such economically viable enterprises there. They can use this as a bolt-on or something more. It's certainly something to consider, and not only is this opportunity an incentive, but in the last few years these poly units have become grant eligible as well under certain schemes like the Crofting Agricultural Grant Scheme and the Small Farms Grant Scheme, which has elevated the economic viability of starting up a small horticultural scale enterprise. So that summarises a bit more about the background of why these units have become so popular and what it means for the areas, particularly in the northwest of Scotland. What we'll do now is we'll look more closely into the uses of these units and what it is that people are doing with them and what sort of ideas you can take forward if a poly unit is of interest to you. Obviously the main staple of a poly unit, that's why greenhouses and polytunnels have been so popular, is the conventional uses. So growing vegetables, leafy greens, soft fruits, things like that. People have grown a diverse range of things in their polytunnels that have tapped into various different markets, but primarily for self-use as well. There's just something that is particularly special about homegrown fruit, something that comes naturally, that you grow yourself as well, the sense of achievement, and that has been an incentive. It's been something that has encouraged people to do this type of work. The ranges of fruit and vegetables have gone from root vegetables to your standard tomatoes and cucumbers and things like that, right up to the more obscure perhaps, and certainly with poly units in the Outer Hebrides there are examples of more unique growing, things that won't typically be grown in that target area. The benefits of a poly unit is that it extends the growing season and you can condition the climate within that unit using various technologies or just as the unit itself to accommodate a more tropical style of growing. They're also particularly good for protecting against the weather elements. So like I've explained already, that the wind speeds up in the Outer Hebrides are quite extreme. So at least with inside a unit, it protects from that somewhat. The benefit of conventional horticultural growth within a poly unit as well is that you can target higher yields as well, particularly if you're selling your produce or you require higher yields for whatever it is that you're doing. This way you get a bit more out of each square meter that you're growing something in. Well, it's not to say that growing outdoors doesn't have a positive effect where you are as well. You might be very lucky and have fertile soil and bits of shelter, but the poly unit just takes it that step further to get slightly bigger, slightly better, slightly more, in many cases, providing all the other factors are considered. But beyond standard horticulture, people are, now that there's been developments in the designs of poly units, more ideas have come forward and people are trying to be a bit more diverse with what they do and tap into markets that maybe haven't ever been seen before in the area that they are in. For an example, poly units have become particularly popular with livestock at the moment. This is due to they're a cheaper, cost-effective alternative to a standard agricultural building. Not every crofter or smallholder can afford such a shed, as ideal as it might be, but the gap between is that a poly unit, polytunnel or one of these other various designs, they have everything that you need that a shed would provide, but just on a cheaper basis, even if they aren't quite as robust as a standard agricultural shed. The considerations for animal use are things like ventilation, thermal regulation as well. So the heat that is retained within these units has been a challenge in some of these units. Ventilation is another one that naturally, that if there is no wind flow through or there is no sort of inlet and outlet, the air inside can become stagnant and cause respiratory issues in animals. But these companies have taken these things into consideration and have designed their units to accommodate these factors, and there's been some very interesting developments between some companies, which I'll explain when I go through the various types of unit. There's been some very interesting developments that have accommodated for these factors, such as heat rising from livestock, that it needs an exit higher up so that condensation doesn't build up, using different types of sheeting and things like that in order to reduce the amount of heat that is brought in, and rather reflect some of the sunlight away. Particularly in a crofting setting or up in the northwest where smallholders have harsher winters, maybe perhaps, this has offered a chance for, particularly at lambing time perhaps, to be able to monitor livestock a bit more, to be able to have a place that has security from the outer elements, that they can handle livestock safely and securely, and the surveillance has less time factor attached to it, because you're not having to go out onto a hill to see your livestock. You can just go into the shed and or the polytunnel, sorry, and there they are. It offers a range of things that, from a lambing perspective as well, that you can give your lambs a chance to thrive in a dry, secure area before putting them out, just to make sure they get that little bit of a boost before going out into the elements. Some people have bigger poly units that they use for their cattle. I'll talk a little bit about some of the amendments that people have made for that, particularly up in the north where they've got Highland cattle. The horns can be a bit of a problem, but it's amazing that people are seeing the benefit of these units. But it goes on to a dual purpose as well, that even though people are using them for livestock, whether it's for overwintering hogs, for example, where they get the benefit of being fed and safe and dry inside, but then in the summertime they might not have any livestock in there. You wouldn't really need to have any livestock in there. So as a dual purpose, what can happen is people might decide to grow certain fruits and vegetables or other items within the summer months, but then clear it out and then use it for livestock in the winter. Another case and example is an individual who was growing during the summer. They were growing various fruits and vegetables and they were making jams and whatever else for themselves. But in the winter time, what they did was, on the run up to Christmas, they were putting chickens and turkeys in, and then that was a market that went to a particular time of year. It was seasonal and it fitted just nicely with their whole growing season. So ideas like that, it just shows the dual purpose that can be for livestock and horticulture, combined. So it offers from an agricultural shed point of view, it offers something more than a shed would do, because you can tap into a couple of different enterprises with the one unit, with the one piece of technology. And there are cases that people have put up polycrubs or keeder houses or even polytunnels to just use as general purpose agricultural shed for storage of machinery, for storage of livestock bedding, for storage of livestock feed, just to keep things a bit more secure, a bit less weathered. I think it's fair to say that the possibilities are quite endless, really, and I'm forever surprised, and pleasantly so, that the number of ideas and innovations that come out of people that are looking to put a poly unit on their croft or smallholding or whatever it is that they decide to do. We have cases of examples where people have taken on a unit and they are producing trees, for example. So they're taking them from seed to sapling and then selling them on. What that offers them is something that's slightly different, takes, from my understanding, takes less of a physical input to manage, and what they get from it is it actually was quite a lucrative, viable business enterprise, and it suited what they were doing. It tied into other schemes and other businesses, so there was a bit of collaboration that went on within that area where this was going on. Other examples, there's a case and example up in the Outer Hebrides where somebody is growing citrus fruit in their poly unit. Something that was completely unheard of in the Outer Hebrides, but it is something now that, particularly with the likes of Harris Gin, for example, or some of these other island gins, things like that, people have been able to grow citrus fruits that might tie in with another market, that people can say, well, I have a Hebridean gin with a Hebridean lemon in my gin. It builds up to that, and we'll talk a bit more about marketing as well, and things like what to do with the produce, but it just shows some of the examples that it's not just being able to produce whatever it is in your unit, it's how it ties into something else and ties into a bigger market. Certainly one of the biggest things in recent years has been the rise in agri-tourism. People want to get out to the country to see the landscape, to visit new areas that have aesthetic beauty and things like that. But what we also do is we go to places to try the local cuisine. And agri-tourism has been a big driving force with a lot of funding and a lot of ideas of how certain, again, smallholders and crofters and things like that, how they generate an income for their business. So an example as well is these poly units have their place now as well, that people can go and pick their own fruit, particularly in the summer months. So when tourists come into an area, they can go and pick their own, which is a nice experience in itself. Other companies have gone even further to have poly units that have accommodation in one end and then have the growing happening in another, and it could be something as simple as it's just flowers and botanicals and things like that, so that it's a nice experience that you can sit out in the poly unit and enjoy the flowers and things like that are there. Others have produce that's actually grown in it, and people use the produce there to make meals and add to whatever it is that they're eating during their stay. Other people are putting up poly units just for leisure space, and you know, they enjoy having a retreat to go to that isn't quite outdoors, but is safe enough and secure enough inside that you're, you know, if it's raining or whatever else, you have a place to go. But it's almost like another extension of a summer house, something like that. So again, the range of ideas is quite diverse. It ultimately, really, if a poly unit is something that you're looking to put up yourself, it really is only limited by the imagination of whatever it is that you want to do. And it, like I say, it continues to surprise me, just the amount of ideas that people have and continue to have, and there seems to be a market for all of it. Now that we've explored a little bit about the various possible uses of the units and the fact that there's a wide range and diverse style of enterprises that you can employ, what we'll do now is we'll look at the various types of units that are available and how they might fit into the uses that you wish to employ. We'll start with the most commonly known, perhaps. We have the standard greenhouse, which has been used for many decades, and they offer a wide range of possibilities for growing. For botanical gardens use them, they can be extensions on houses, things like that. But where the greenhouse hasn't really been such a popular chosen poly unit exactly for the purposes of growing in places like the Outer Hebrides or in the north of Scotland is because of the glass in particular. It's quite fragile, so that these types of units, they are also quite expensive on that front, but they don't serve the purpose of being cost effective as well as being robust in the needs for the higher wind speeds and such. The most commonly used poly unit of all is the polytunnel itself, typically made from a steel or aluminium galvanized frame that has various different anchor points to the ground. It could be spikes directly into the soil, it could be anchor plates that fall in, or it can even be concreted into the ground depending on how much stability you want for that particular unit. The covering, the cladding for the polytunnel has always, where the name poly comes from essentially, is the polythene sheeting that is fitted over this steel frame under tension. And in recent years there's been very different mechanisms for how these are fixed to the unit, perhaps for like some ventilation systems where the side walls are actually open of the polytunnel, and that the polythene itself is fitted to rail guards that run along the length of the polytunnel and pull it into a tight sort of fit over the frame. Others go directly into the soil, and it's a trench mechanism that is in place. But what makes the polytunnel so popular and successful is the fact that it is the cheapest option of all polytunnels or poly units. It has a larger range for size and style to accommodate anything from the garden grower right up to commercial scale horticulture production. Even within the polytunnel scale itself, there are certain variations from scales of economy, such as smaller, thinner, more fragile items that are cheaper that can go into a garden and can be retrofitted to maybe be a little bit more stable, right up to the really the premium type polytunnel that can sustain probably a lot more and has more thermal efficiency perhaps, as well as the frame being far more robust than that of, say, a thin aluminium framed one that's a much cheaper. Where the polytunnel perhaps fails in a sense in the likes of, again, I talk about the far north of Scotland and the Outer Hebrides in the west, is that it doesn't cope very well, or it hasn't at least historically coped very well with the higher wind speeds, snowfall, that sort of thing, where I made the analogy earlier on that many crofters and farmers have found that their polytunnel has disappeared overnight, but in actual fact, some cases it's not even that it's disappeared, the frame has been anchored to the ground, things like that, but where ventilation has been, if there isn't enough of an outflow to accommodate the amount of wind that's coming in, sometimes these items, the polythene bursts and perishes because it bursts like a lung. The other sort of downfall of a polytunnel as well, particularly in the livestock scenario, and I mentioned about the Highland cattle with their horns earlier on, where they have a bad habit of poking their horns through the thin polythene sheeting. But the same can be true of a farmer or a vegetable grower that puts their fork through the polythene, or for whatever happens, it's far more perishable a cladding system than maybe what some of these other designs have now incorporated to their units. For many though, this particular item actually remains the most viable option overall. However, in response to a gap in the market, shall we say, where polytunnels were not coping, a company down south in England, called Keeder Greenhouse, what they have done is they have diversified their design somewhat to accommodate a more reinforced framing system. But what their main selling point is that while they offer the same sort of attributes as a polytunnel in terms of size and scale, they have a different cladding system that effectively is like bubble wrap that goes over the framework that's similar steel frame design, but this has a higher thermal efficiency, is far more robust than the conventional polythene sheeting, and doesn't perish in the same way that a polythene sheet does, where in many cases sun damage, polythene sheet might become brittle over 5 years or more. The sheeting that's on a Keeder lasts much longer, and retains the thermal efficiency that it has from when it first goes up. With these types of units as well, naturally the unique design means that there is a premium price involved with these types of units as well. Given the various range sizes as well, there is, beyond a certain size, a 4 metre wide unit of a keeder house or bigger requires specialists to come and erect the unit as part of the product value. So it's not one of these types of units that you can put up yourself. The company themselves, they send people that are trained and specialised in these particular designs to put them up for you as part of their package. And while the keeder greenhouse is very, very good for its core design, which is principally horticultural production, a gap has been seen where there is a really high value to them for the purposes of livestock production as well. They offer ventilation in ways that other poly units don't quite have as such, whilst offering the robust nature of their units. So they have ventilation panels that can be incorporated into the roof, which allows for condensation and heat to rise and leave, preventing respiratory problems in animals and things like that in these units. That's part and parcel of why the cost justification as well, given that they command a higher cost. What's probably been the driving force, however, of a lot of the popularity of poly units up in the Outer Hebrides in the north, and what has been a very encourageable unit for smallholders and crofters alike, is the polycrub. Polycrub comes from a company in Shetland who made a design of a particular type of greenhouse type unit. So it's a semi-permanent building on the basis of the fact that in Shetland they have the climate factors that are being experienced all across the north of Scotland. They wanted a unit that was robust and that could survive the weather that they were encountering and allow people to grow on their crofts, on their land, where a greenhouse or a polytunnel would have failed before. Polycrub differs in design because of the materials that are used as well. So the core design of it is effectively posts are concreted into the ground at various intervals, and over the top of that, to form a rib cage, is polyethylene tubing that has been recycled from salmon farming that would normally go to landfill and doesn't degrade quickly. So these units have been repurposed. This particular material has been repurposed for something that wants to have a long lifespan. And over that rib cage, some timber framing is put down, and then the cladding that is used is a polycarbonate, twin-ply polycarbonate sheeting, which has quite high thermal regulatory properties, as well as dispersing light throughout the unit quite uniformly as well, much like the keeder bubble wrap. But what goes a step further is that this solid structure, which is permanently fixed to the ground, what makes it different is that the materials that are used for this type of unit are so robust that it can survive, as the company states, up to 130 mile/hour winds. And there have been demonstrations where people have tried to break the polycarbonate sheeting with hammers, and it barely leaves a mark. So that it offers the most robust type of unit. Having been dubbed the horticultural Hercules or polytunnel on steroids, it has a reputation for being that more robust unit. The downside to a polycrub is that they only offer a maximum size of a 4 metre by 12 metre unit. They won't go to something that is bigger than that. So if you wanted to go to commercial scale agriculture or sort of horticultural enterprise, you would need multiple units to do the same job that maybe one keeder house or one polytunnel can do. The popularity of these units, though, is that they are more diverse in terms of agri-tourism as well, where I mentioned about accommodation, things like that, where the Polycrub company have developed a design called the Cozy Crub, which it taps into that agri-tourism market. Furthermore as well, like I talked about social spaces, these are the types of units that offer that, because it is an equivalent of an agricultural shed perhaps, or a garden shed, that it is more robust, and has a company that have redeveloped or redeployed their design to accommodate various different enterprises. Another thing that they have done recently is developed a livestock specific polycrub, which has a different type of sheeting. So we talked about a different colour cladding in order to reflect some of the sunlight away, and they've redeveloped some ventilation attributes to the unit as well in order to accommodate this. Choosing a particular unit differs from person to person, preference to preference, but Certainly a lot of consideration has to be given depending on the type of enterprise that you might want to employ as well. So there are some units that have, depending on the scale of the enterprise as well, have more benefit in terms of livestock production. Others that are more suitable for horticulture. Others are better for geographical location as well. You know, we talk about the wind speeds, we talk about extending the growing season, we talk about the availability or the limitations that are imposed in a particular place. These are the sorts of thoughts that will determine which type of unit it is that you go to. Even beyond these companies who have spent time developing designs and that's their core market, others, many farmers, many crofters, many smallholders have opted to design their own as well to suit whatever it is that they have on the croft or whatever they have on the farm. Recycled materials, whatever they can get their hands on in order to make something. And it just shows that there are economies of scale here as well, that it doesn't matter whether it is just an experimental idea or whether it's something that has been a really thought out full-scale business plan. There's something that fits every budget, there's something that fits every idea, there's something that will fit every smallholder, every crofter. So the final part of this is understanding what to do with the produce that you have at the end of it. Once you've got your poly unit, once you've established your enterprise, what the next step logically is. So the most active businesses at the moment, what they tend to do is it varies depending on their target audience, but it can be from something that as a small independent business you can sell at the croft gate or the farm gate through the use of an honesty box, as people do with eggs or they do with punnets of fruit during the summertime. You can sell direct to your clients. This can be vegetable boxes, this can be a list of clients that you prepare, certain list of items that they pick and choose from. It entirely depends on your target audience. Others sort of sell and establish themselves in food markets and food assemblies, which is a collaboration between people, various growers, and it's a source for people that are purchasing, or restaurants, cafes, whatever it is a single place for them to go and see who is offering what, and it's an opportunity for those that are producing to have a central place to sell their product. Others go that step further as well, where they take their produce and they add value to it. So I mentioned things like jams earlier on. So, you know, where products or produce that may not be saleable as whole fruits or whole vegetables, you can add value to these, such as making jams, pickles, preserves, or any other types of items that just add a bit more of a premium to what it is that you're growing. The glory of this sort of thing now as well is that advertising is mostly free with the power of social media. You know, gone are the days where people were advertising through newspaper ads or getting adverts drafted up that were costing money. Nowadays you can advertise and establish an entire business just through Facebook or Twitter, Instagram, and people can follow what it is that you do, which leads to the most important part of whatever it is that comes from your enterprise, and that is selling the story. So the story is what people really want to buy, I think, in the long run. So if you have a story to tell for how a particular product is made or where it comes from or the situation that you're in, these are the things that are saleable to people when you have tourists that come in. Like I said earlier, we want to try the local cuisine, things like that, or what is grown in a local area. We use the Outer Hebrides, again I've used this example quite a lot in this topic, but for example, if you have a poly unit that is rearing Hebridean sheep, and these are reared, you know, born and reared in the Hebrides, they are sold in the Hebrides, they are marketed to a Hebridean restaurant where somebody tucks into Hebridean lamb or mutton. These are the kind of things that, because it's kept local and it's kept seasonal, these are the kind of things that people love to hear about. You can take any type of product and the story behind it, people will buy into that as well. So it's an important point to remember that whatever you do, have something that has a value to you. Have something that people want to get behind and encourage people to buy your product. Again, as I've said several times throughout this topic, that there are opportunities out there, it is just finding the one that suits you best. So on that note, that was a crash course in the power of poly units as I've described. It shows that there are a diverse range of items that cover a diverse range of possibilities and enterprises. And if it's something that is of interest to you or something that you want to pursue, you can always get in touch and get advice from the Farm Advisory Service helpline, where they will point in the direction of somebody that is in your local area that can give you advice and see if it's something that you want to take to the next step. I've also left a list of a handful of suppliers that do various poly units, and if you want to use the magic of Google, you can log onto their website and have a look and see what it is that they have to offer and see how it ties in with whatever it is that you would like to do. I hope this has been of interest to you, and perhaps I'll be lucky enough to speak to some of you in the future and hear about the enterprises and business opportunities that you've taken on in the future, perhaps as a result of this. Thank you for listening.